Greetings to our online reviewees from 130 countries in 6 continents worldwide. We are 9.09er, this is Coach Ervin, and this is Coach Brian. Before we talk about IELTS reading, we'd like to mention that 2023 is the year of reopening because this year we are reviving up to 34 branches for face-to-face learning in the Philippines. It does not mean that we're no longer offering online review courses, as thanks to the online program, we were able to reach 130 countries worldwide. Our one-on-one coaching is still available 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But for people who are looking for blended learning, the situation right now is possibly the best, knowing that you have access to on-site review classes, your teacher is in front of you, but if ever you live in an area where there is no branch of 9.09 or no review center in your locality, we're very accessible. All you have to do is look for internet connection, and there you go. You get to attend our live online classes. You get to have access to our recorded online classes as well. Now, let's take a look at the reading as a subtest. IELTS listening is exactly the same for both academic and general training candidates, but Sir Brian now is going to give you an overview of the slight differences between IELTS academic and IELTS general training. So, Coach Brian?
So they're identical actually in the sense that you're going to be reading passages and you will have to answer questions about the reading passages that you have read. This is very familiar because you have had something like this before. This is a reading comprehension test. But the difference between the academic examination and the general training test is that you have more passages when you're reading general training tests. So when you're working on the reading passage for general training, it's usually shorter, but you have more passages to read. Whereas when you're taking the academic module, the passages are typically longer, but you have fewer passages to read. But essentially, the total number of words, if you're going to account the total number of words for both modules in the examination, will be roughly the same. It's just that academic passages are longer, split into fewer sections, whereas the general training examination will have more passages, but they're typically shorter.
Thank you for that, Sir Brian. In the listening test, it doesn't matter if you're taking academic or general training. But in reading, you must know the correct module because in this examination, the moment you take the wrong module, you are required to repeat all the 4 subtests. The question is, for taking the academic module, number 1, those who are applying for a student visa. Number 2, the healthcare professionals who are applying for a license or registration in US, UK, Ireland, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. But what about the general training candidates? Number 1, those applying for fiancé or spouse visa. Number 2, the skilled workers applying for working visa. And who are the skilled workers? Butchers, welders, electricians, linemen, mechanics, carpenters, painters, and the like. Number 3, those who are applying for immigrant visa, going to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. If you are unsure if it's academic or general training, we recommend that you verify with your agency or your consultant. But if you don't have any, well, 9.09er is very approachable. All you have to do is to send us an email or send us a Facebook message. Let us know your target destination and your occupation or profession, and number 3, your target visa, because this will tell us which particular module in the IELTS you are supposed to take. So, between the two, academic or general training, which one is easier? Sir Brian?
That's an interesting question. I would say that the general training examination is more accessible because everything will be in the social context. So a lot of people feel that it's easier compared to the academic module, but there's actually a catch because if you're taking the general training examination, the standard is pegged at the higher rate, so you need to get a higher raw score to get your target score, whereas when you're taking the academic examination, it's actually pegged at the lower band. So you can actually commit more mistakes in the academic module and still get your target or required score. So life is very fair because it doesn't really matter whether you're taking academic or general training, it's going to be fair.
This is in line with what we have mentioned in one of our videos, that in IELTS, if the material is more difficult, that means to say the band score equivalents are lower. But if the material is easier, that's when they adjust the band score equivalents to something which is higher.
Yeah.
So now we have established the differences between academic and general training. Let us move on to the number of passages, the number of points, time management, and so on. So typically, for IELTS academic, there are 3 passages. Within one passage, around 13 to 14 points. So that means to say the grand total is 40 points. What about the time limit? In the listening subtest, you're given 30 minutes to listen to the recording, answer the questions, and if it's IELTS on paper, you're given 10 extra minutes to review your work, to transfer your answers. But in the reading subtest, everything is incorporated in 1 hour. So the test supervisor or invigilator is expecting you to read, answer, transfer, review your work, everything in 1 hour. Now, let's talk about the time management. Sir Brian, would you recommend that candidates allot 20 minutes per passage, or would you recommend otherwise?
Oh, you shouldn't actually spend 20 minutes. That's too much time because that's going to take away your transfer time. You have to ensure that you're able to do everything within the span of 1 hour only. So I assume for every passage for an academic examination, you should spend probably no more than 14 or 15 minutes, maybe 3 minutes to read the questions, about 5 to 7 minutes reading the passages, and the remaining time trying to answer the questions. Try to budget your time per passage, not exceed 20 minutes, certainly for every passage for academic test takers, because that's too much time.
For certain people, they ask, so what's the passing score in this examination? In another video, we have mentioned that IELTS is not a pass or fail examination. In order for you to know your target band score, you must know the target destination. Number 2, which visa or program you're applying for. And number 3, what's your occupation or profession. In the event that you are uncertain, like what we've said, you can send us an email or you can send us a message for you to know the typical band score requirement for that country or for that visa that you're applying for. So now, let's talk about the different types of questions in IELTS reading. Like IELTS listening, you get to encounter multiple choice. There's gap fill or fill in the blanks. There are all sorts of completion questions like sentence completion, diagram completion, table completion. It's just that there are 2 types of questions that come out exclusively in the reading subtest but don't come out in listening, and they are true, false, not given, and matching headings. So now, let's ask Sir Brian to give you guys an overview of true, false, not given, while later I'm going to give you an overview of matching headings.
True, false, not given is a comparison test. You will have to compare the statement with what is written in the passage. If they match, or if everything is in the passage and it's accurate according to the statement, that's true. And then if it's opposite perhaps, or it is inconsistent with what is written in the passage, it tells you otherwise, then it's false. You say not given, however, when it is likely true or maybe likely false, but there's insufficient information or there's additional information in the text. Quite difficult, honestly.
Well, it's a bit difficult knowing that when we were in high school or when we were in middle school, we are only introduced to 2 options, true or false.
Correct.
But in IELTS, the third option, not given, is the one which is really mind-boggling. The reason why some candidates would like to consider other English examinations where true, false, not given as a type of question does not come out. So, it's difficult if no one is going to tell you what exactly you are supposed to do. So if you look at the answer key, how come it's false when all this time you thought it's not given, or vice versa? That's why later, when we talk about the test-taking strategies, the tips and tricks, hopefully it will help you on how you're supposed to plan or make your guide how to deal with this type of question in IELTS reading. Now let's take a look at matching headings as a type of question in IELTS reading. Notice that in IELTS reading, the paragraphs are usually numbered or lettered.
Yeah.
Say, for instance, they are numbered from 1 to 7 or A to H. And then there are headings, and you're going to identify which heading best represents that particular paragraph. Sometimes there are times when there's an equal number of paragraphs and headings. Example, 7 paragraphs, 7 headings. But sometimes, to make it a little more challenging for the candidates, there are more headings than the paragraphs. Example, only 7 paragraphs, but a total of 10 headings. So this is when it gets to be a little tricky because the other options are just added there as fillers.
True.
So now that we have given you an idea that there's true, false, not given, there's matching headings, personally, we want to share what we did when we took the test, because Sir Brian right here, in all of his English examination attempts, got the perfect grade in reading. So he took English tests thrice, okay? 1 IELTS academic module, 1 IELTS general training module. In one attempt, IELTS on paper. In another attempt, IELTS on computer. And he also took a different English examination, which is PTE, or the Pearson Test of English, where he also got the perfect grade in the reading subtest. So guys, that's not a fluke. That's not by accident. Why? Obviously, if someone got the perfect grade in reading in all of his English examination attempts, Sir Brian right here perhaps knows what he is doing.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to highlight that for someone like me, I'm not fond of reading, and I wouldn't really consider myself a genius in reading. Well, in fact, I'm the kind of person who needs to read it all over again in order for me to get it. But how come for someone like me who is not really fond of reading, how come I still got the perfect 9 in IELTS reading? That's what we are going to share with you now. Because truth of the matter is, you don't need to understand all of the words for you to get the passing score or the perfect score. So now, let's ask Sir Brian, what do you think is an important strategy that candidates need to employ if they want to pass, or possibly, like you, get the perfect grade in IELTS reading?
Well, there are a couple of things. Number 1, you need to be able to comprehend. And number 2, you need to be able to read fast. And I understand that a lot of people can't actually do both and improve both. So my tip for you is to actually just purposively read, which means to say that you're not going to read leisurely. This is not a fun examination. This is not to have fun during the test. This is actually a test in which you have to find answers. So try to focus on hunting for the correct answers instead of trying to read everything. Sometimes you don't even have to read the entire selection and you'll be able to pick out all of the answers to the questions. So try to employ speed reading techniques like skimming and scanning. Try to find the answers to the questions while you're reading, and have a goal, which is to answer questions and not to just digest what you're reading.
I'd like to echo what Sir Brian mentioned here by sharing with you the effective steps to follow in the reading subtest. Number 1, it's best that you read the questions ahead of time.
Yes.
Why? Because this will allow you to determine which information to absorb and which information to disregard. How come? Imagine that for one passage, there are roughly 400 to 700 words. But out of 400 or 700 words, how many correct answers do you need? Only 13 to 14. This means to say there are more details that you do not need as compared to the answers you are looking for. So if you read the questions in advance, this will allow you to determine which info to pay attention to. So say for instance, you read one sentence and there's no answer there. What's the point of digesting the information for that or on that particular sentence if it does not contain anything? That's why it's best that you read the questions first. Number 2, that's when you read the passage. This time, you have an idea which answers you're looking for. So Sir Brian mentioned earlier, you are not reading to enjoy. You're not reading to have fun. You are reading only to look for the answers, and that must be your guiding principle all throughout. But while you're reading, we recommend that you, number 3, answer the questions immediately. Why? When you are able to catch something, you don't want to let go of it anymore. What do? Stop reading the moment you find an answer, You go to this question to answer that before you continue reading. Good news, you don't have to go back to that portion later on because you are done with that. And we guarantee if you're going to follow this technique, it's actually possible for you to finish answering all of the questions without reaching the last sentence. Or, depending on the passage, it's even possible for you to finish answering all the questions without reaching the last paragraph. Because chances are the answers are spread all throughout the text. It's not as if the answers are always concentrated on the last paragraph. So let's have a recap. What are the 3 easy steps to follow in the reading subtest? Read the questions first. Number 2, read the passage while you do step number 3, answer the questions while you are reading the passage. So now, we're going to share with you tips on how to deal with true, false, not given and matching headings. And I'd like to begin by saying that for true, false, not given, more than 95% of the time, the answers appear chronologically in the passage. So imagine, if the first passage contains 7 true, false, not given questions, where do we expect to find the answer to number 1? Somewhere in the beginning. We're not saying that it's always in the first sentence or it's always in the first paragraph. What we're saying is the answer to number 1 is somewhere in the beginning. But what about the last item, number 7? The answer can be found towards the end of the passage. Not always the last sentence, not always the last paragraph, but towards the end. So granting you were able to find the answer to number 1, stop reading, go to the question to answer that. And then when you continue, anytime now, you're going to find the answer to number 2. But here's the big what if. What if the next answer you're able to find is the answer to number 3 and not the answer to number 2? Sir Brian and I can only think of 2 possibilities. It's possible that you missed the answer to number 2. So what do? You go back to the passage, look for that portion containing the answer to number 1 and number 3. Because for sure, somewhere in between, there you will find the answer to number 2. But what if you were not able to find the answer to number 2? Then chances are the answer to number 2 is not given. More often than not, you don't have to wait until you finish reading everything before you can say it's not given. If the answer to number 2 is not found in between number 1 and number 3 in the passage, chances are the correct answer is not given. So strategies like these are the ones we discuss in class so that you don't have to waste your time reading everything, paying attention to all the details. And good news for you if there is a sentence that contains an idea that you don't understand. Good news if that sentence does not contain any answer. At the end of the day, it's not how much information you were able to get or absorb, but it's how many answers you were able to find. So that's a tip that I'd like to share for true, false, not given. Now, Sir Brian right here, as I've mentioned repeatedly, got the perfect grade in reading. So let's ask Sir Brian. In all of those attempts, for sure, you've encountered matching headings. So for you, what could be the best technique to deal with this kind of question?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. What I usually do for matching headings is I try to read first all of the possible options because that's going to help me to identify what I'm going to encounter when I start reading the passages. And then I start reading each one of the passages, trying to hunt for the possible headings for each one of them. And if I can't figure out the answer for one, then I move on to the next until there are fewer and fewer options to choose from, and that's going to help me to identify the answers much better towards the end. It is not always required for you to answer all of the questions in order. If you can't answer one, then you have to move on and just want to eliminate as many distractors as possible so you're left with fewer and fewer options to choose from, and you can determine the better answers later on.
When you read the headings, I need you to identify the keywords because most likely, these are the keywords that you're supposed to find in the passage later on. But please do not think that it's always the exact keyword that you're going to find in the passage. And this is why it's the reading subtest, right?
Yeah.
Comprehension is everything in this examination. So build your vocabulary because the more words that you understand, the easier the reading subtest is. Say for instance, when you look at the headings and then the keyword is, say for instance, mixture. So don't always expect to find the word mixture in the passage. Sometimes the word that appeared in the passage could be variety or diverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a matter of knowing which words are somehow related to each other. And I also noticed that for matching headings, sometimes the heading is not really the topic of the entire paragraph. Sometimes that heading is only discussed in one sentence. It's
Yeah.
even possible that the other details in that paragraph have nothing to do with the heading. So why are we letting you know? Sometimes don't ask yourself, which heading best represents this paragraph?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's best that you ask yourself, in which particular paragraph is this heading or information being discussed? I understand that a lot of the candidates find the IELTS reading subtest challenging, as evidenced by our national average in this component.
Oh yeah.
It's relatively low. That's why we are hoping that by telling you the correct steps to follow, by sharing with you how many minutes you're supposed to spend for each passage, and the techniques on how to deal with true, false, not given, or matching headings, it will help you not just in getting the required score, but who knows, you might even be a niner in the reading subtest, someone who got the perfect grade in IELTS reading. So before we wrap up this discussion, like in some videos, I'm going to ask Sir Brian now anything else, words of wisdom or last minute technique or tip to help people ace the reading subtest or perhaps improve their comprehension in general.
It is very frustrating sometimes when you're preparing by yourself and nobody's guiding you and helping you in the process, especially if you cannot find the correct answers, or if you're not able to explain why the answers are so and so. So sometimes you need guidance and expert opinion from other people who have actually taken the examination themselves and have gotten stellar marks. So we invite you to be part of 9.09er IELTS Review and Tutorial Center, and hopefully you will be enrolling in our center so we can assist you, help you, guide you, and provide the encouragement and motivation that you need to succeed in your examination.
Well, if you have limited budget, we have a free trial. Send us an email, send us a private message on Facebook in order for you to know how to avail this free trial. Or if you're taking the examination soon, like in 2 days or 3 days, and you're just watching or you're just looking for videos, please explore the content of our channel because we have more than 100 free videos. We even have podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're also on TikTok because 9.09er is everywhere. And we're not about selling all the time.
Yes.
You will notice that we give free lessons to help you in reaching the target band scores. So until next time, once again, we are 9.09er. Bye!
Bye.